A young man, a teenager, went on a long crime spree, usually while barefoot, stealing hundreds of items, all leading up to his theft of an entire airplane at the age of 19. Today we have the case of a young man named Colton Harris Moore, who was born in Mount Vernon in Washington in 1991. And when I say young man, I really mean young man, as in he was a teenager throughout most of today's case. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start back at the beginning. Colton spent most of his youth living in his mom's house out on Camano Island. However, his upbringing was anything but normal. In fact, you could say it wasn't good. He mainly only lived with his mother because his father was either high out of his mind or in prison for most of his early childhood. Neighbors didn't really know a whole lot about Colton's family, but they knew enough to call CPS several times over the course of a few years, fearing that he was being abused or at the very least neglected. His mom remarried and he got himself a new stepfather at some point, but even he died when Colton was only about 7 years old. Colton's mother didn't really hold the highest opinion of him early on. In fact, ever since he entered the first grade, she would tell people that there was, quote, something off about him, and that there was sort of a disconnection. He didn't listen to his teachers, often got into petty fights at school, and sometimes broke things around the house just for the hell of it. The whole breaking things thing was kind of a two-way street, though. Colton wasn't really the only one in the wrong. His mom was quite the drunk and didn't really treat him with the most care, much less his stuff. She often broke his toys purely out of spite as well. After the age of 7, it's said that Colton often left home and began to go live in the wild. He got his sustenance by breaking into local vacation homes and stealing food, water, blankets, tools, really anything he needed at the moment. Then he would run off into the forest again and wouldn't show back up for days. It seems that his father did come back at some point, moving back in with his mother. That didn't last too long, though. By the time Colton was 12, his father walked out after an altercation at a family barbecue, never to return again. Colton's lifestyle was definitely going to lead to an arrest at some point, and that point came when he was around 12 years old and got caught stealing a neighbor's camcorder. It was kind of hard to deny, as the camcorder was found in his bedroom. If you thought this might cause him to change his ways, you'd be wrong. By the time he was 13 years old, he'd already had 3 more charges against him. Each of these convictions only ended up netting him about 10 days in a detention center or getting a little bit of community service. During one of those stints, he was diagnosed with depression, ADD, and intermittent explosive disorder, which is exactly what it sounds like, kind of random explosions of anger, intermittently. His mother hadn't really given up hope on him, though. She felt like everyone was out to get him at this point. She felt that his previous offenses were doomed to overshadow any good that he might do. Every time he had anything good, everyone thought he stole it. What does that do to a kid? She said. It wasn't too long before Colton ended up in juvenile detention, and it wasn't too long after that he ended up in a group home in Seattle. In 2008, after not being at that group home for too long, he broke out and escaped. Once he was out of there, he went right back to his previous crimes, but not only that, he upped the ante. A lot. Colton went on a crime spree that would go on to span over 8 states and 3 countries. According to police, Colton was getting by again by simply slipping into people's homes to get what he needed. He'd hop in the shower, get some food from the fridge, or grab anything that he might need on the journey before bailing. In the beginning, he'd steal a bicycle here and there to get around on. He gradually moved beyond stealing what he needed to survive out in the woods. The thefts steadily moved up in value. For instance, he found a credit card in one of the homes he entered and used it to order both bear mace and a fancy, super expensive $6,500 pair of night vision goggles. Now, although that pair of night vision goggles was definitely pricey, to say the least, Colton wasn't about to stop there. He kept moving up that crime ladder over the years. He moved on up to stealing cars and used them to move everywhere from Washington all the way out to Illinois. He would end up in Idaho, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and, well, Washington and Illinois. A car he stole from Iowa was found in Illinois, and a car he stole from South Dakota was found out in Nebraska. He was kind of all over the place. In July of 2008, he stole a car from one of these homes he burglarized and ended up crashing it into a supermarket called Elgar Bay Grocery. He left his backpack in the car, which was full of evidence, including a digital camera. Either not thinking out his next steps too well, or even wanting to taunt the police, he snapped a picture of himself on that camera, and that picture would go on to become famous. This picture became attached to who would become known as the Barefoot Bandit, or even the Barefoot Burglar in some circles, as Colton usually committed these crimes while barefoot, leaving shoe-free footprints all over the scenes of his crimes. In the fall of 2008, November 12th, a single-engine plane started rolling out on the field in Orcas Island in Washington. I think you see where this is going. Colton had hit the major leagues. He had stolen an entire airplane and was about to hit the skies. It's now believed that he learned to fly a plane the old-fashioned way. He collected all sorts of flight manuals and handbooks and played his fair share of flight simulator games on the computer. He had even gotten his hands on a How to Fly a Small Airplane DVD that he evidently watched pretty closely, as he really did learn how to fly. However, while he could fly, he wasn't so great at landing. He crashed the plane near Yakima in Washington and bailed. He was soon declared to be the prime suspect. A few months later, in March of 2009, the Island County Sheriff's Office started to seek his arrest, worrying that he was a flight risk. Pun intended. Colton managed to go a couple of months without any huge, notable crimes. However, that would all change on June 20th when he stole a deputy's police car from Camano Island. The deputy's rifle, along with a lot of other equipment, was still in there as well, and he used this to then move on to a fire station and burglarize it as well. He vanished into the night, laying low until summer was over. Then, in September, he burglarized the island market on Orcas Island and attempted to steal from an ATM, mainly only succeeding in vandalizing it in the end. He must have injured himself in the struggle, as his blood was left at the scene. It was later tested and confirmed to be his. A few days later, a speedboat was stolen from the same island. It was thought that he took this boat and headed out to Canada, but he would end up somewhere very different in only a few days. Then, on September 29th, he jacked yet another single-engine plane out of an airport in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. He had done it again. Police found his signature barefoot footprints throughout the hangar. The plane he stole was a Cessna 182, and he flew it out to Granite Falls, Washington, and tried to land it there. Emphasis on tried. He ended up crashing the plane and leaving it there, running off into the night again. On October 1st, a logger was out in the woods when he found the crashed plane out in a clearing near Granite Falls. Colton had left his DNA all over the plane, and his trademark barefoot footprints led out to a small camp in the woods. That plane actually belonged to a radio personality named Bob Rivers and was worth well over $150,000. It was badly damaged, but it was actually able to be repaired in the end. By this point, it was the most expensive item Colton had ever taken. There was a huge manhunt for Colton at this time. Eventually an entire SWAT team and even a helicopter from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security were involved as well. It's even reported that Colton ended up shooting at a deputy while on the run, although this isn't confirmed to have been him. The Barefoot Bandit had become even more famous. This was when a Facebook fan page was dedicated in his honor. That page really took off, and he got extremely popular all over the internet, even internationally. At some point, Colton had committed a fair number of robberies with a man who would end up becoming his partner in crime for a while, a man named Harley Davidson Ironwing. Boy, that is a name. Ironwing, which my autocorrect turned into Iron Man, was a convicted felon already when he was arrested for shoplifting. He ended up ratting out Colton and telling interviewers all about their thefts and escapades in the past, stealing from various people's homes and having a great time. In December of 2009, the feds secretly charged Colton Harris Moore with the theft of the plane back in Idaho. The affidavit listed that he was the primary suspect in roughly 65 different crime cases across the US and Canada. However, we now know that he had committed well over 100 crimes throughout the two countries over these years. The value of all the thefts would eventually climb up into the millions, over $3 million in fact. In February of 2010, Colton made his way out to another small airport in Anacortes, Washington, and stole yet another plane while running as a fugitive. This airplane was recovered later on Orcas Island. Soon after, on Orcas, a grocery store was also burglarized. Bare footprints were drawn in chalk on the ground. Soon after, a burglary attempt was made on a local hardware store as well. Police were scouring the entire island looking for him, but they didn't find him in the end. Things were quiet for a while after that. With the story becoming a major news sensation all over the world, a studio in Hollywood formally bought the rights to make a movie based on the book based on the Barefoot Bandit's life, called The Barefoot Bandit, The True Tale of Colton Harris Moore, New American Outlaw, by Bob Friel. Colton's mom got a lawyer to seek control over any entertainment interest related to him. Then, in May, Colton finally resurfaced once again. Video showed him waltzing around a marina on Lopez Island shortly before a boat was stolen. That boat was later found floating out in the waters near Camano Island. He tried to balance out the thefts by doing some good here and there. In May of 2010, he dropped off about $100 at a veterinary clinic out in Raymond, Washington, about 96 miles from Seattle. He attached a note which said, "Drove by, had some extra cash. Please use this money to take care of the animals. Colton Harris Moore, aka the Barefoot Bandit, Camano Island, Washington." He then spent the next month and a half roaming all over the place. He stole a boat from Washington, took it down to Oregon, then stole a car and some food from a small airport in Warrenton where he failed to steal a plane. Then in Ontario, Oregon, he stole yet another car from a small airport. It then turned up a few days later in Boise, Idaho. Then he stole a car in Wyoming, and another and another. While burglarizing another house in Yankton, South Dakota, an unfortunate family returned home to find a naked man in their house. Evidence shows it was none other than Colton himself. He then stole another car and bailed. It seemed that Colton really wasn't all that satisfied by petty theft anymore. I mean, we're talking about going from stealing entire airplanes to robbing people at a gas station or a convenience store or something. He was really stuck on the whole airplane idea by this point. I mean, we've seen it happen a couple of times now, but he wasn't really done with it yet. He was ready to go back to the more legendary sorts of crimes. He drove an SUV that he had stolen towards the Carl Stephan Memorial Airport near Norfolk, Nebraska. He parked it about a mile south of the airport. Later that day, several people reported thefts throughout that airport. It is possible that he stole items here and there while trying to build up the courage to take yet another plane. However, it wouldn't be done here. He sat out on the road once again. There were even more burglaries throughout Pella, Iowa, until yet another car was stolen. And another, and then more airport thefts. This string of burglaries, car thefts, and airport shenanigans just went on and on and on, as I'm sure you get the gist. This would eventually reach a fever pitch when Colton made his way out to Monroe County Airport in Bloomington, Indiana. This was when his most famous stunt would take place. On the 4th of July in 2010, Colton broke into a locked hangar in the Bloomington Airport and stole another plane. He managed to fly it all the way out to the waters near Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas, where he crashed it into the shoreline. It was immediately assumed that the Barefoot Bandit was responsible. I mean, who else was doing this? Shortly after, in true Barefoot Bandit fashion, there was a string of break-ins all across the island. Local police, while investigating these break-ins, found cartoony chalk outlines of feet drawn about, mainly near a grocery store that had been broken into, along with the words "See ya" written nearby. Then, 2 days later, on July 6th, the federal judge out in Washington released an indictment against Colton. It cited him for interstate transport of stolen property and airplane theft. The FBI put out a $10,000 bounty on his head for any information leading up to his arrest. They were pretty positive he had a hand in this recent airplane theft as well. Colton's mother, giving her opinion on the whole thing, simply said that she hoped he was on his way to flee to a country that didn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. Before too long, the Royal Bahamian Police Force and the FBI worked together to find and capture Colton. After a number of people throughout the island phoned in tips about his location, they were finally successful in locating him. They caught him after he stole a 44-foot boat in which he tried to escape. The police shot out the engine and he was there, dead in the water. Except not really dead, but he was in the water. Colton, realizing that it was all over, threw his laptop into the water and put a gun to his head. But the police were luckily able to talk him down. Just before dawn on July 11th of 2010, this 19-year-old international criminal was in police custody. His long, memorable, insane string of crimes was finally at an end. He told the police that he was actually on his way to Cuba to throw them off of his trail. From there on, he planned to go out to the Turks and Caicos Islands. The bounty on the Barefoot Bandit was paid out and split up between the people who were directly involved in capturing him, mainly tipsters, a security guard, and the officers who actually got him. Only 2 days later, Colton was pleading guilty to illegal entry into the Bahamas and illegally landing a plane. Although these were some heavy charges, they were only the tip of the iceberg when it came to the charges he had waiting against him back in the United States. But for these, he got away with merely a $300 fine. Despite his eternal beef with his mother, she was able to wire him the money to pay it off. He was then swiftly deported back to the US that same day, with the Bahamian police and the FBI both escorting him. He landed back in Miami that same day. A day later, he appeared before the U.S. magistrate, Robert Dube, to find out who would be representing him in court, and surprisingly, his mother hired a lawyer for him. Within a couple of days, it was ruled that he would be sent back to Washington to face the charges against him, since he was arrested under their warrant. Colton decided to just go along with it and not continue on with the hearing. He was held at a detention center until he was extradited back to Washington. He was such a flight risk that he was required to wear both handcuffs and leg irons during transport. Colton waived his right to a speedy trial, giving the prosecution all the time they needed to build up a massive case against him. Around this time, Harley David Ironwing, that really is the dude's name, pled guilty to his charges of assault and was sentenced to 18 months in prison himself. Months came and went, and in November he was back in court. He pled not guilty to interstate transportation of a boat, plane, or gun. He also pled not guilty to being a fugitive in possession of a firearm or for flying a plane without a pilot's license. The Barefoot Bandit Facebook page was blowing up, having about 60,000 followers. People were even selling t-shirts with his face on them, along with the text, "Mama tried." Then, in June of 2011, roughly a year after his last crime spree, it was formally recommended by prosecutors that Colton be sentenced to 6 years in prison. He pled guilty to all 7 counts against him. The Washington court, however, thought that 10 years would be a much more fitting sentence. They were expected to lower that to about 9.5 years, but Colton's attorneys fought to keep that original 6-year sentence in place, using his nasty childhood and psychiatric problems as reasoning. On December 16th of 2011, it was all over. Colton Harris Moore was sentenced in an Island County court to serve just over 7 years in prison in Island County Jail. During sentencing, he addressed the court, saying, "No stretch of the imagination to say that I am lucky to be alive." The Superior Court judge, Vicky Churchill, said about the case, "This case is a tragedy in many ways, but it's a triumph of the human spirit in other ways." She said that Colton's childhood was a mind-numbing absence of hope, and added that he was actually genuinely remorseful for what he had done. Colton apologized for his crimes and said that he would serve his term dutifully. He said that, when he got out of prison, he wanted to utilize his love for airplanes and become an aeronautical engineer. He was only 20 years old at this point. A documentary was made about the Barefoot Bandit back in 2014 called Fly, Colt, Fly, The Legend of the Barefoot Bandit by Adam and Andrew Gray. Unfortunately for Colt, under a plea deal he forfeited any profits from selling the publishing rights to his life story. In December of 2015, in prison, Colton started up a blog, which unfortunately no longer exists. To much disappointment, the blog didn't really talk about him, his life, or his crimes. It was mainly just created to voice his support for Donald Trump, who was running for office at the time. Then, 1 year later, Colton got some terrible news. His mother had gotten cancer, and the outlook wasn't looking promising. He took to the public to seek donations. Not for her treatment, but to have her cryogenically frozen. He said that waiting for a cure in the future was the only way to really save her. "Cryonic preservation is the only solution to save Pam," he said on his GoFundMe page, where he was looking for donations. His mother, who was 65 at this point, remained silent on the issue. However, her attorney said that yes, she was suffering from stage 4 lung cancer. They didn't know how much time she had left. The Island County prosecutor found the whole thing fishy, though. He had a much different take on the whole thing. He said, "Are people so dazzled by fame that they'll decide the best charitable use of $200,000 is to freeze a famous criminal's mother based on an uncertain promise of future reanimation? It is a crazy world." He wanted to remind the public that this man was in jail for robbery. Unfortunately, the whole struggle was unsuccessful, and Colton's mom died just a few months later in May. 1 month later, Colton was released from prison on probation, all alone in the world, and was sent to a halfway house near Seattle. He actually got a job at his attorney's law firm, performing low-level clerical work. But it was an honest job, and he was both proud and happy to do it. He tried to get some donations online to attend flight school training, but his parole officer vetoed this, saying that any money from the donations would have to go towards the huge restitution that he owed to his victims. He got himself a Twitter account where he wrote in his bio, pilot/entrepreneur/boyfriend/FMR international fugitive. The past is done, the future is unwritten. Life is what you make it. He has since deleted the account though. It's now held by someone else who is keeping it safe for him until he comes back. Only some screenshots of what he originally posted still remain. In 2019, Colton requested to visit some friends overseas, but he was told no by his parole officer. He wanted to take some work outside of Washington and kind of do some work as a motivational speaker, but this was shot down as well. He argued that it would help pay off his massive restitutions, and he was going to be off of parole in 4 months anyway, but no go. It's assumed that he simply continued his current work, but there simply isn't a lot of new information about him right now. I guess we'll see if there are any more Barefoot Bandit shenanigans out there in the future, but let's hope that Colton really has put the past behind him. He has specifically said that he intends to. So, once again, thank you for watching my video. It's always kind of a small call for celebration when I get through an entire huge crime case and nobody died, and this is one of those. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, and if you enjoy content like this, feel free to subscribe if you want to. I make a lot just like this. It would be cool if you followed me on social media, because if anything were to ever happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way to find out where I went. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account which I keep linked down in the description below, and speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We have Entreprenant, Grack, El Palmieri, Jim Bob Ghostkeeper, real name, Salad, Kevin, AMCNT, Rick from Work in Progress USA, Tang, Sass Johnson, Marianne McCurdy, Buttery Frangus, Wafrans, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Marsh, Buffazerk, Rinsenstein, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Scoochie Main, Jackie, and Mark Barnett. You guys are the best. So this has been Kyle with Dire Trip. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.